everyone. My name is Kelsey Zemet. I am a partner at Kingsley Zemet and have been practicing law for 17 years in the area of complex litigation. And this webinar series is deeply personal for me as a lifelong Altadenan and now displaced Altadena family. With a standing structure in the burn zone, we are all trying to navigate this process moving forward. And I realize that we have a lack of guidance from public officials on many topics, and the power has really been in turning toward one another as a community to talk to subject matter experts and get our hands on every bit of information that we can so that we can make the best decisions under terrible circumstances. I am thrilled to invite Dr. Josh Fisher to join us today. I've known Josh probably 8 or 9 years now, and he is going to be here today to answer our questions in a casual, straightforward way, particularly questions that we don't feel like we are getting answered by what is coming out publicly. So, Josh, let me, without further ado, have you introduce yourself, and then I'll pop in and ask you a question.
Great. Thanks, Elsie. So my name is Josh Fisher. I'm a climate scientist, and I live in Eagle Rock, so not in the burn zone. I was at JPL for about 12 years, and now I'm a professor at Chapman University, and we spun off a space company called Hydrosat that I'm the science lead for. So still lots of friends and colleagues who lost their homes up in Altadena and Pasadena. And my wife's a professor at Occidental College here in Eagle Rock, so professors as well who were living up in the area that lost their homes. And so I'm a climate scientist. I'm not a public health scientist. I am not an atmospheric chemist, so just kind of telling you about what I am and what I'm not. But I do a lot of wildfire work, a lot of ecosystem science, obviously a lot of remote sensing coming from NASA and in the space company world. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about like where I'm coming from when it comes to the wildfire and the conditions. But I didn't want to do like a whole PowerPoint presentation and kind of lecture at you all because there's just a ton of information out there and you've seen it, you've read it, you've listened to it. And so, at this point, I'm suspecting now is not a time to just like get more of that. Now is more of a time to perhaps just engage with me and think about how I think about it as a scientist, both from a public health standpoint and environmental standpoint. So I guess immediately, and just like by background, Kelsey and I know each other because our kids went to the same daycare up at the Child Educational Center, so they were in the same class and little toddler buddies for a while. So that's how I got connected with Kelsey um, here.
So,
Yeah,
Josh, what type of testing did you personally do in the Altadena area?
yeah. So when the fires first occurred, for one, I was actually out of the country when they occurred. I was in Costa Rica running a big field campaign in the rainforest there. And so when I flew back, my immediate concern was the toxins and the public health component of the air quality. And so, because you got a lot of bad things getting burnt up and getting into the air from batteries and plastics and all sorts of in paint and things like that. So the question was, how much of that was in the air? Was it a problem? Um, and like what were the potential health impacts? So I just tried to science it as much as possible for my own just interest and concern. And so, I basically looked up the biggest air toxins of concerns from urban fires, and you've heard a lot of them, I'm sure, like particulates and VOCs, and then other like carcinogens like benzene and um, fancy chemical names like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PHs, heavy metals, and things like that. So I wanted to immediately figure out, all right, well, I got my list of things that I need to be you know, interested in, and could I measure them as a scientist? Like, again, I not an atmospheric chemist, but I do a lot of atmospheric measurements as part of my climate science. So I don't know a lot about PAHs, but I knew enough about some of the related science to start to get into it. Um, so I started looking online to figure out what kind of instrumentation could measure these things. And there are some things that are very easy to measure and very cheap, and some things that are harder to measure and very expensive. And so I went out and bought a few things. There's a few things right here, and I'll kind of demo them a little bit. But like uh, and there's different quality also. Like you can buy some cheap instrument, and like me and my wife bought one, and it like sucked, and so we returned it. So and that's like often par for the course when you're buying cheap stuff very quickly on like Amazon. But another thing is that you don't necessarily always have to measure everything because they are correlated with one another. Like when the wind lifts one thing up, it lifts both things up. And so if you're seeing one thing, um, or if you're not seeing one thing, you're probably not seeing the other thing with what you're measuring. Of course, as a
What's an
scientist.
example of that specifically?
Yeah, so like particulates are very easy to measure, like PM 2.5 and 10, because that's like normal air quality. That's like smog, dust type stuff. And so that's like junk that gets in your lungs and not good for asthma and respiratory things like that. It's not carcinogenic necessarily, but it's if wind picks up that crap, then it's going to pick up other crap if it's there too. Although if it's there, that's the key word. So there's like you see PM 2.5, does it mean there's benzene? Not necessarily. But if you're measuring benzene and you don't see benzene, you're probably not seeing the others. But if you're not seeing benzene, you're probably not seeing particulates. So there's a little kind of order of
Okay.
operation there. Um, so I got some equipment, did some measurements around my house in Eagle Rock, which is outside the burn zone, and it was pretty good. Obviously, there are bad days in which all the LA Basin and Inland Empire are like filled up with junk, but on like a normal clear day, when the winds are blowing out one way to the ocean and not chunking up everything in the LA Basin, then things are pretty good. But when things do accumulate, that's where we start to get concerned. So I did my own little measurements, and then otherwise donated to everyone's GoFundMe for a few weeks. And then one of my buddies, actually from high school, who lost his house up in Altadena, started pinging me because his kids were at Odyssey, and one of the campuses got hit pretty hard, and the other campus didn't. And then they were trying to figure out if they should put their kids back in the other Odyssey campus. And he was just like, very, kind of peppering me with questions. And I said, I got a bunch of equipment. Why don't I just go up and measure the air quality? And we can take some soil samples as well, because obviously kids are, playing in dirt a lot, especially young kids, and picking up and ingesting. So we did that. We went to both campuses, and we went over to his the burnt down house. And so what we found was that things are very in terms of air quality, things are very at the whim of like the winds, right? Things start to accumulate. You see stuff, and if winds are blowing one way, you see another thing. Um, the air quality measurements were worse in the burn zone, and it's because you've got all this like burnt up ash and junk that gets lifted up. And when you're outside the burn zone, you everything there's nothing sourced from outside the burn zone. It's sourced from the burn zone. So by the time it gets outside the burn zone, it's diluted, and it's hard to pick up, especially if the winds are good. So, um, but in the burn zone, and you guys who are watching this know this better than I do, having lived it, but you can see ash everywhere, right? And obviously Army Corps is coming in and like replacing topsoil some places, not everywhere, but then like they're replacing topsoil next to a building that has a whole bunch of ash still on its roof. And so then like it rains and maybe it comes off, but then like does that come in? Where does that go exactly? Um, Especially with my main focus on like my friends' kids, um, and um, and so I recommended to him, because he was fortunate to find I think a place in South Pass or Eagle Rock. He got his kids into Eagle Rock where I am, which is great, and it's a good school. And I'm like, it's pretty good here. Like, I would recommend you just keep your kids here and not even have that stress and risk. And plus, there's no like you have to commute back up to Altadena from wherever he is. It's not like you can, obviously live there. So that was my recommendation to him. But not everyone has that privilege. Not everyone has kids, but some people are very healthy. They don't work from home. They're not even home all the time. Other people have elderly parents, respiratory issues, or other pre-existing conditions. So there's a continuum of vulnerability to these levels. Oftentimes, people want to know binary, yes or no. Should I live there? Should I not? Am I getting cancer? Am I not? Am I going to get asthma? Am I not? And obviously, like when you start to say that out loud, you realize that probably the answer is not so binary. It's going to be some sort of continuum of risk. Um, and so I was telling Kelsey earlier, I buy organic foods, right? And partially it's to kind of reduce the risk of whatever pesticides get on the food. If I don't eat organic foods, is it going to mean I'm going to get cancer? Probably not. But like I'm just reducing my risk and exposure because maybe. So I think a lot of people are looking to, scientists or public health officials to say, this is what's going to happen, this is what you should do. But there's this continuum, and that's why it's hard for public officials to say, this is what you should do or what you shouldn't do. Sometimes it's political and not necessarily like the most scientific. Sometimes it's not in the best interest of public health. They need to rebuild. They need to, do all the residential aspects. So there's a mixture of that. But I figured that's why I'm here. Have a conversation. I don't want to talk too much at you, and I think you can ask questions through the chat. And Kelsey has some pre-loaded questions from talking with folks that she can start asking me. And I can also go through some of the instrumentation. I did post a picture of me up in Altadena with this on LinkedIn, and then the chair of the Pasadena Environmental Advisory Commission saw it and like invited me to come in to the council meeting and give them a little briefing on that, which I did. So that was interesting as well.
Yeah, could you just kind of briefly explain the equipment behind you, where you purchased it, rough purchase price, and if a non-scientist it would be valuable to a non-scientist to try to use correctly?
Yeah. So like for instance, this little white pill thing does radon and VOCs. I think my video is somehow here, I can flip it. But um, So two good things to use. It's pretty useful. It calibrates well with other instruments. I think it Bluetooths to your phone, gives you little warnings when things get high. Now we just keep it in the kitchen, so like when we're like frying up something and things get like still like bad, you don't realize it. It'll send you an alert, and then like we're like, open up the windows. Useful. This one is called Air Things. It's about 240 bucks on Amazon. I'm not like working for this company telling you like it's like you should buy it or like, and I didn't scientifically test this with calibration techniques to say like it's going to be perfectly accurate, but kind of useful. You can see when things kind of get bad and things don't get bad, and that's what you kind of want to know. But then what is bad, what is like medium, and what is good, like green, yellow, red. Um, it'll tell you like because there's the measuring of the chemicals, and then there's like like the levels that we can absorb before things get a problem, and then with your pre-existing health conditions, what it means. So there's like concentration, time of exposure, and then like your vulnerability to this stuff. So um, this is something useful just to like check in the kitchen, and then obviously like if you're walking around Altadena in the burn zone or starting to rebuild or interested in what your kids are being exposed to, you know, like something that you could look to look at VOCs and rate on and other things. It does particulates and other things. Um, this one is a bit finicky. Um, it does benzene, which is kind of cool, but it like kind of works, kind of doesn't work. Sometimes it doesn't work, and it's I think something cheap about it. This one was 60 bucks, super cheap for benzene, and that's what I was interested in. Um, I think if benzene does get high, it'll register. It's like because benzene is actually really low. In fact, it's probably mostly non-existent. It tends to just be like stop using me. Like there's nothing that
Okay. And
um,
that measures air or soil?
air.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, and then this one, this temp top one, oh, it's off. Um, does also VOCs, particulates, and it does formaldehyde. Another nice, fun thing to measure. And this one's pretty good. We like this one. This one was 170 bucks. I think we bought two of them and gave one to our kids' school, so that the teachers could teach the kids about these techniques and they could measure the things around the school in Eagle Rock, of which you're not really seeing anything from the burn. But I think Eric or somebody who's helping coordinate this asked, well, there's a lending library. Can you just like lend these out to you guys? And so we've been lending them out to like teachers or friends, just like, casual. But 170 bucks, pretty cheap. And so again, quality. What's also interesting about this, put it on, is that it'll give you like just a simple like green, yellow, red color coding to tell you like if things are bad, especially because they kind of mix the particulate reading with a couple of the other readings to give you an air quality index, kind of like what the EPA uses. So I just turn it on and you can see if you can read backwards, it says good or
Okay.
or Dug if you're reading it. But yeah, it's mostly based on the particulate, which is basically how most air quality standards are built because we're not used to like carcinogens everywhere. We're just used to smog. And
Right.
so most air quality is based on particulate, which is still not very good.
What
Um,
about testing for lead? I think that's one of the things
oh
most
yeah,
of the standing structures are dealing with right now.
yeah. So lead and PAH as PAH. There's got to be a better way of saying that. Pause. But then you're okay. So lead and pH, I did not show you. Lead, I think, lead is normally not measured in the air. It's normally measured obviously from paint and water and things in soil. But I was interested in the air, and I think the one that I found was like $3,000. So that was one I did not buy. I probably could have bought it on some research grant. In fact, I have got a colleague at Chapman, Christine O'Connell, who lives up in Pasadena in Bungalow Heaven, and she just got a recent NSF rapid grant to do soil testing, like extensive soil testing. So she's up there doing a bunch of soil testing right now. But to the lead measurement in air, it's 3,000 bucks, and I was like, nah, decided not to buy it because again it was going to be correlated with the particulates and some of the other things, and we were in Eagle Rock, we were seeing like nothing of concern pretty soon after the fires. For the PAHs, I think that one cost like $30,000, like
Oh,
pretty
wow.
expensive. And so I was like, well, yeah, not going to do that unless it was a big problem. But if it was a big problem, then maybe you get Pasadena city to buy it or something like that, or the city to buy something. I know there's a bunch of research teams up there. There's this New York Times article that Kelsey sent me today on the toxic soup, and there's some folks from Texas and other uh, um, researchers doing some measurements. But it doesn't really help you as a resident if the researchers are measuring it and they're not like immediately connecting you to what they're finding, or they're trying to publish it in a paper that comes out a year later or something like that. So um, that's why we're talking about these kind of cheap and easy to use devices that you don't have to wait for people like me and the scientists to like make some announcement that you may or may not see about what we found, or wait for some New York Times journalist to come find us. So that allows you to kind of go out and be like, well, Josh said something and I only kind of believe him, but let me just go test it myself. And it's just like, oh yeah, he was wrong or right, whatever.
So I think the New York Times article talks about doing testing a mile from the burn zone that indicated that that air seemed within normal levels. But I think a number in a lot of folks' heads is the 250 yards, which is specifically laid out in the LA County Public Health order as a recommended distance to not reside within 250 yards of a burned structure. What do you think about 250 yards as a benchmark? Is it arbitrary? Is it something that people should feel comfortable relying upon? What's your response in general to that?
Yeah. So public health officials and policymakers and scientists like to give you a single number to like base your whole life around. And hopefully what I'm conveying is that like life's more complicated than a single number. So it's like, oh, it's 100 yards. I am 101 yards away. I am fine. Like, or I am 99 yards away. I am in terrible trouble. Like when you say it out loud, you realize, it's like probably more complex. And it's a continuum, right? It's this non-binary um, kind of threshold. And so, but I think understanding the science, and that's what I try to like communicate to people and understand myself, is how it actually works and how it actually affects you. So it's going to be this relationship, if we're talking about air, of of concentration and like wind speed. So you could have a bunch of, um, and I think it's mostly just sitting in ash. It's not really like outgassing a lot. I don't think there's much smoldering anymore. So that would be one thing if it was a continuous like source that was getting, and it would build up if you like stayed there long. But it kind of is because you've got like a bunch of burnt up stuff um, sitting, and when it gets lofted from the wind, like if the wind blows the other way from that 100-yard line, you're okay. If it blows right into you, you're probably less okay. And so it could be that you're in some like valley area and like it accumulates and you're kind of stuck in it, or it's like you're on top of a hill and all the winds are blowing down from you. So you can see how this 100-yard, 250-yard threshold is really dependent on both the concentration from which it gets lofted up and which way the winds are blowing and how they're blowing. And then again, like if you're particularly susceptible, with pre-existing health conditions, you probably want to be a bit further away because you don't want to risk it. But if you're a young, healthy 20-year-old, you could probably, be okay for a while. So, um, but you gotta figure out what to do, right? It's not so like I'm in Eagle Rock. I'm not moving from Eagle Rock. Like I'm more than 250 feet away from, or yards away from Altadena. So clearly, my life is okay. But that was something that I had to figure out. Like, do I need to move? Like, or is there this giant like nuclear power plant or like coal power plant of like fumes coming off from Altadena and just dumping right onto Eagle Rock because of some weird wind flow pattern? And actually, even before I bought my house in Eagle Rock, I was looking at air quality um, flow rates around this area and seeing how air quality flew, kind of moved in from LA and back through the Inland Empire. And I saw that it actually does get a little stuck up in the La Cañada area sometimes. And you can see that with the fog too, right? Like visually.
Hmm.
This morning was a bunch of fog stuck up there and there wasn't here. It's like the air kind of sits sometimes, plus the 210 running right through there. Um, but you have to make your decision. I think if your house was burned down, you're obviously in the burn zone. If your house was smoke damaged, you're very, very close to the burn zone if you weren't already in the burn zone. And so that's a pretty close proximity to these potential contaminants that you might be getting. If you're in Pasadena, like down like in Old Town or something like that, then you're probably okay, right? I mean, that's one thing. If you're up in La Cañada, a little bit further away, you're probably okay. But if you're in that burn zone or like anywhere that receives smoke damage, uh, that's the same type of winds that are picking up that stuff and getting potentially onto you. The question is whether it's there or not.
Hmm.
And with
So,
all the remediation from Army Corps, with the rains that have come through and washed stuff out, the question is it there anymore? I think it is not there anymore, from my understanding. But I'm not doing continuous measurements everywhere all the time, so I can't say that with like data, just because that's just my assumption. But is it in the soil? Um, and my answer would be absolutely, it's still in the soil. Like you'd have to have a lot of rain to rain it out or to like break apart those chemical bonds or have new chemical bonds created. Because Army Corps is removing topsoil into like some schools and I guess some parks or something, but not everywhere, not your old house. And so it's gonna be in places, and there's gonna be places where the rain doesn't get because there's overhangs and like there's pools and drainage and things like that. So, um, yeah, I think that more testing is needed on the soil aspect. Um, but even still, the rains aren't that heavy, right? We haven't gotten that many rains, so there's probably still some at the surface, and then things are gonna dry out because it's LA, and then winds pick up, get into your nose again. So. Um,
I think that's really the primary concern for most people, like you said, is this rebuild process goes on. Most people, I think, feel confident in the short term making a decision based upon how close they are to the burn zone, what their risk tolerance level is, right? But as you say, 6 months from now or 12 months from now, when there are financial constraints because insurance is less willing to put you up somewhere else, are we moving back into an area where sure, the immediate ash that you can see at that point will most likely have washed away after the end of the winter or blown away, frankly. But what is now in the soil and what will be kicked up through the continued phase 2 cleanup, what will be kicked up as people undergo construction, and what I hear you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is you think it's a very real threat, but also what is airborne will depend on what is getting kicked up and wins at that specific time. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And like, let's say we get like a ton of good rain, right? Like 2 weeks of like solid atmospheric river rain, like, and like, let's ignore the landslide concerns right now. But like, just purely like, they often say the solution to pollution is dilution, right? So like, you're diluting out anything that's in the soil, right? You're not creating new sources. You're getting rid of it. It's going to get better with time and rains, and even the winds that blow it elsewhere. But like, how much time and how much rain is necessary depends on the concentration and things like that. So um, yeah, there's this like inflection point about like I do something, I don't do something, and everyone's wondering like, well, how much rain? How much? What's the concentration? Like, because that affects my decision, and that's challenging as you can imagine. I think that so my approach is like just arm you guys as scientists. Just everyone's got to become a scientist at this point. Go get some of this equipment. Um, the soil testing labs are kind of backlogged right now, um, um, but like can we make science more democratized and just like have everyone just take measurements? And you can do that more and more. People have these purple air sensors, and you can get the CO2 sensors, and it's just a lot easier to do more of this. And I think that and at price points of like $100 to $200, like you can just do this, right? So I think that the more we can do that as residents and community members, and you can share them around if you don't have the $200 to spare or whatever. So um, that will just give you the answer of what you're seeing, at least what you're seeing. It doesn't tell you like if what you're seeing is bad for you or not, but at least there's like two parts of the question. Am I seeing anything bad? And then if I am, is it really bad for me? At least you can see if it's bad. And then is it bad for me? That's more of a judgment call based on like who you are, how long you're exposed to it, or your kids or your parents or whoever it might be. And then um, uh, yeah, in the concentration of it, and then even still, like, what is bad? Like, let's say you do have a pre-existing health condition. Let's say you have asthma or some sort of precancer or something or other. What is bad? And so that's where you move into the public health realm, and those guys will say, again, continuum. It's just a risk and probability, and so like as you increase concentration and you increase vulnerability, you increase probability. But like you've seen those stories of people who smoke, cigarettes until they're 100 years old and they're just fine. Does that mean everyone can smoke until they're 100 years old? Be just fine? Absolutely not, because the statistics show that like most people who smoke cigarettes get lung cancer or something. But there's these exceptions, and so that's why there's no like hard and fast rule ever with public health. I mean, not ever. I mean, there's obviously things that are.
What about people who do decide to move back fairly close to the burn zone or within it, let's say 6 months from now, and it is a particularly bad air day in terms of some of these measurements, which we hope are being shared by then. What's the relative safety that you can provide for yourself by staying indoors? Is that a big enough distinction on a bad air day to make sure that you're staying indoors? I understand
Yeah.
each home and windows are different, but just as a general rule of thumb, is that a good technique to try to protect yourself and your family?
Yeah, indoors is good. I mean, if there's a bad air quality day, what I do like normally, on a bad air quality day in LA is I'll close my windows, right? And like, um, just because I don't want the bad air quality. I also have a bunch of like supposedly like air quality improving plants, indoor air quality plants and things like that, like NASA approved space station. I don't know if they work, but and then on good air quality days, I open up the windows because I also know that my house is all continuously off gassing paint, you know, and our own CO2 builds up, and anything I'm cooking like will build up, and my kids are kicking up whatever. So on good air quality days, I absolutely air out my house. But on bad air quality days, I close the windows. Same with my car. I turn on the outside air on good air quality days. When you're sitting there in smog with that diesel truck in front of you, you turn on the recirculated air, but then your CO2 builds up, right? Your CO2 builds up, and anything else inside. So I've got a bunch of air filters, uh, kind of the fans with the filters. I bought like top of the line ones for my kids' classes. They're in the kids' classes. The teachers love them. We actually did this before the fires for COVID because it filters out COVID. And so we already had all the best air purifiers, and so we just kept buying them. My wife's really into this, and she like just buys every new one. That's her like toy thing. And so we've got like air purifiers like everywhere. Like I'm like I can't
Do you have
walk.
a favorite brand?
Uh, yeah. So it depends what you want. There's like really quiet ones that are powerful, and then there's like a little less. So if you like that, and then there's like and there's light ones for portable, and then there's ones that are like really big and powerful, a little bit louder. So kind of depends what you're interested in. But air purifiers indoor are pretty good, also for the same types of things we're interested in from the fire emissions. So good for COVID, good for asthma, good for the air, the fire junk. My kids' teachers like them because they're always getting sick because the kids are always coughing and regularly, and so that's helping them as well, and the kids
Hmm.
with asthma. So we try to have fresh air when we can, but when the air quality is bad, it's a good question, Kelly. When the air quality is bad, absolutely block off with the indoors, stay indoors, and but yeah, if you can get back in 6 months, that's pretty good too, from what I hear. Like the rebuilding process is going to take longer than that.
Well, I think that a lot of folks with standing structures are coalescing around this idea of 6 months, only as a reality that that seems to be what some insurance companies are providing for is 6 months of alternative living. And I've noticed a trend of this discussion. Are you, considering moving back in the fall and not feeling safe? So it's a little bit arbitrary in that sense. It's an external deadline. I think most people understand they have to make a decision that's individualized for their family's needs, specific health concerns, and risk tolerance. Unfortunately, there's this financial overlay also, right? Um, but I think my last question has to do with lead. And one of the things I've noticed in the formal remediation processes, lead seems like the number one way to deal with it is by containing it. So I've seen proposals if your house was potentially exposed to lead to use a special paint that essentially traps it against your walls and then should restrict off gassing or it to come back into the environment. For soil, I'm seeing proposals, like you said, removing 6 inches of topsoil and replacing it with new soil. Or if you have sod in your backyard, tearing out your sod, putting down new sod. What's your response or thought in general to, is that the most effective way to deal with lead, is to just trap it essentially?
Well, the paint would be different than the soil, right? Because it's air versus soil. So if it's air, I mean, I just don't think there's a lot of lead in the air right now unless it gets kicked up. And so then painting something isn't going to help you if it just gets kicked up again. Um, after you painted. So
That I think specifically is tiny particulates of ash and soot within the house that they'll clean. But if there's things you can't see, is it best to just, like I said, literally just paint your walls and kind of trap it there?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't I don't know how bad the smoke damage is. Like my mom, like we had like a small house fire like 20 years ago, and like she had to like really redo a lot of stuff because it's just so much damage. I don't like on the walls. Um, yeah, I mean, as we know, there's a lot of bad stuff in our walls already from asbestos and paint and lead and things like that. And so we tend to be fine with it when we cover stuff up. But like if you're remodeling and doing DIY, obviously you should be careful, and your contractor should be careful if you're doing remodeling. Um, and then like people's floors and carpets all get like I think you got to remove all that carpet and rug stuff because it's all just like hard to get out. Not really
Hmm.
funny clean. Um, but not
Yeah.
interior. For the soil stuff, yeah. So there's the 6 inches thing. It's like, but what if it's 5? What if it's 7? Right? What's that cutoff? And it's just like, how does the system work? How does the process work? And it's really just like if it's on the top and the soil's dry and it gets kicked up, or like where did it land? Maybe it like landed 6 inches. Like if I were up there and like planting a tomato patch and wondering if like the stuff was going to get into the tomatoes and I was going to eat it, I would want to make sure my beds were like pretty, obviously new, but like you can't obviously do that for like big garden or big lawns, for example, that your kids might be playing in or your dog might be running around in. And so, you can do what you can, but you can also just like soak hose your backyard for like 2 hours, and you know that the water is gonna like really do something to help clean out the soil and move stuff around. It might move out nutrients, that you might want to use for your flowers, but you can apply fertilizer later. Um, but yeah, that's what I would do is just like soak, 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 and just know I've done my best. Like, if you're like, my enemy is that piece of lead. I'm going to like kill you, lead, and this is how I'm going to kill you. I'm going to wipe out your existence by like flooding. And then it's going to be like, no, I can't, like, combat your flooded irrigation for 2 hours. Like, there's no way like the lead can like hang out there, for that long. You might get well unlucky and there's like some sort of like rock overhang that the lead's like hanging out there.
Yeah.
Those gorilla lead particles that would get you, but you do the best you can. I think that it should be all right. And
Well,
again,
let's hope for
I think
some.
on the soils, if we can figure out how to do the soil testing, and you're concerned, grab some soil, send it to a lab. There's a lot of labs that do that in universities and things like that that are pretty cheap.
Okay. Let's hope for some more soaking rains. And honestly, Josh, thank you so much for your time. I think the practical tips and information is really helpful. I think we had a tech glitch with chat, which is why we didn't get any live questions, but recording this was really helpful. And live streaming and blasting it out. We'll share the recording with our whole community too. And you graciously made yourself potentially available another month or two from now to do a check-in again as we continue to have more information. So Josh, thank you so much for your time, the practical tips, sharing, the tools that you actually bought, whether you found them useful or not, is really helpful because I don't think people are getting this kind of guidance really at all, just on specific tips and tricks. And I will say, remember to join us April 3rd. We have Dr. Sam Alibrando, who is a displaced psychologist, and he's going to help talk about the collective grief that we're all dealing with and how to move forward in that regard. So thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Josh.
Yep. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully this helped enlighten you a little bit more about how to think about the problem scientifically, and not always just relying on others. We can all become scientists ourselves, and feel free to reach out. I think you can find me on social and LinkedIn. My email is everywhere on the interwebs. But yeah, good luck, everyone, and rooting for you and rebuild. Stay strong.
Thank you, Josh.